Up next on the GRIOT, Power in Narratives.
Part of knowing where you're going forward is where you've been.
Darren Franklin, Chief Operating Officer of the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness. This racial equity advocate is a devoted dad and most definitely an American. Welcome to the first episode of GRIOT, Power in Narratives. Darren Franklin, thank you for being a GRIOT. Did you know what a GRIOT was before you came on the podcast?
I didn't. I subscribe to a publication that's named that same thing, and it's a great publication. I enjoy it immensely, but I did not know what the name meant, so clue me in.
It's a noun, which typically refers to Western African storytellers and orators. And basically, these were folks who would use genealogy and history, and they would weave that into the artistry that they shared with other people. And so by you joining us today, sharing your expertise, talking about history and context, you are a GRIOT, and you work with the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness based in Washington, D.C. So tell me a little bit about what exactly you do. You're the Chief Operating Officer there.
Yeah, so I've been there for 15 years this year, and really I see this work less of a job and more of a ministry. Our job is to make sure that all the resources going towards solving homelessness are used in the smartest and most efficient ways.
In the context of homelessness, you've also been an advocate for racial equity within your agency and within that space. And for folks who may not have an understanding of the demographics of homelessness, why is racial equity work important in that space?
Yeah, so the data shows us that people of color across the entire country are more adversely affected by homelessness. So we know that there's something going on there, and in the history of this country, it points to systemic as well as structural racism.
Very interesting, and certainly something that we should all maybe pay more attention to, the issue of homelessness. One of the things we want to do with this particular podcast is we're asking each guest to come to the table with a moment or a person in global or American history that means something to them, and talk to us about why that moment or person in global or American history is significant today, given the climate and the discussions that we're having at the water cooler at work. Well, maybe not the water cooler at work since we're working remotely, but via Zoom or via social media or wherever we're engaging other people. So I'm curious to know, what is your historical moment?
So that was a great question, and you made me go and spend some time thinking about what I would say. And so for me, I thought about the year of 1968. It's interesting because a lot of us know about Tommy Smith and John Carlos, but not a lot of time is spent on Peter Norman, who was the white guy in the photo. And turns out that he stood in solidarity with these two Black men. He paid a great price in his life after that. He went back to Australia. He was a white ally, and he paid a price for that. As the story goes, when he went back to Australia, he basically was not allowed to compete ever again in the Olympics on behalf of his country. In 2020, 52 years later, so many things that are going on in this country are reminiscent of what was going on in 1968.
I think Norman is a really good example of an ally in a brief moment.
Absolutely.
And I don't know, what is the takeaway you feel for people?
The biggest takeaway is that there is a cost for doing this work. There's a cost for standing up for what is right. And it's not just for white folks, it's for Black folks as well. This work does not come by way of it being free, but there's a cost in terms of, in his instance, cashing in his white privilege on behalf of others cost to him was his career. And it's unfortunate that had to happen, or that was the result of him actually standing up for justice and standing up for what is right. But the reality is, in this world, and in particular in this country, there is a cost for standing up for justice. And it's a cost that we all have to pay in service, and be willing to pay if we say that we want change.
Let's assume everyone listening and watching wants change. What are some tangible things that people can do today? As a person of color, now you're sort of able to speak freely about things that you've thought about your entire life. And also, if you're not a person of color, you're getting a lot of information. You're getting a lot of data input, if you will. And it's so, what are some actionable steps that we all can take?
That would be to educate yourself. And I will personalize that we need to educate ourselves, because in this country, we've not gotten a comprehensive history of the events that led us up to this point, 2020, in this country. And so for me, a lot of the things that I've learned over the last several years, as I've embedded myself in this work called racial equity, there's so many things I did not know. And so, the onus is on us to actually really educate ourselves. Get some books. I got some books here behind me. I'm always reading something. But Google. Dr. Google has so much information, especially these days. You can go on Amazon, and the top best-selling books are all about race now, and just pick some of those. But just basically start educating yourself. We all have to learn the true history, because part of knowing where you're going forward is where you've been.
Well, I want to be very mindful of your time, but I do have a quick question for you. I know that you are a devoted dad of 4, 2 adult girls, as well as 2 teenagers, a son and a daughter. But as a dad, and maybe this is something that you say to all fathers out there, all fathers, what should dads be doing right now? I know that you've taken an interesting approach with your teenagers this summer.
Speaking of learning, we actually are, I've assigned them a book to read during the summer. It's Stamped from the Beginning by Ibram Kendi. I would say to dads and to other parents, start from who you are as a person. How are you processing this information? How are you dealing with what's going on in the world? And how are you wired to handle all of that? And I think from leading your kids through this from that vantage point is the best vantage point that you can lead them from, because that's who you are. You're comfortable in that space. You're leading them from your own this authentic place, and I think that's very.
Wow. Well, I am so appreciative of you taking time out of your busy schedule to chat with me, and for also being the first griot for the podcast. But, my takeaway here, my takeaway here is definitely 1968 is a year to remember. The Summer Olympics of 1968 and 3 men. And let's not forget the third, Norman, who stood on that mantle, Olympic mantle, took a risk. And I think as all of us are gently or aggressively attacking the issues at hand today, we can certainly glean something from that. And as you put it, learning is perhaps the first step. That curiosity about learning about others and getting outside of your bubble and your circle, and really expanding your view, and getting informed and understanding the historical context of things can actually help today. I'll just close out with one of my favorite writers and a quote from him, which is, "History is not the past, it is the present." So thank you so much, Darren Franklin with USICH.
Thank you for having me.